Customer Insights Show with Jenn Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jenn and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by Vox Pop Me, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm Jenn Vogel. Today, I want to talk about the role of foresight in CPG companies, communications around it, how to know which future opportunities to invest in. To dive into that topic today, I'm joined by Joanna Lepore, the strategic foresight lead at Mars Wrigley. She reinvents how the company invests in future opportunities, curates curiosity to impact the treats and snacking categories, and is the host of the Future Imagined podcast. Welcome to the show, Joanna.
Hey, Jen. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and a huge congratulations on the success of your show. It's always nice to see an insights podcast getting so much recognition.
Thank you so much. And I'm such a fan of your show as well. So it's a special treat to have you on today. I love interviewing other podcast hosts. It's always a fun conversation.
Yeah, I know. I'm following Jamin as well. So talking about podcast experts.
Right. Don't worry. We're going to have some fun today. So thank you so much for joining. To get us started, I won't ask you who your favorite serial killer is, but that'll be a topic, something to ask Jo next time you bump into her. But to get us started, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at Mars, and some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, happy to. So a little bit about me. So I'm Jo, obviously. As you can tell from the accent, I'm an Australian and I came to the US 5 months ago now. I can't believe it. Time has flown as part of my role in a newly created global foresight team at Mars Wrigley. So I've been with Mars for 4 years now, almost 4 years. And prior to that, I've been working for Mars in Insights in Australia. So really looking after consumer insights and innovation specifically. Prior to that, my background is in marketing and marketing innovation. So I did that for General Mills, for Essity Care, and for a local dairy company, which was now bought by Saputo. So did branding and marketing for about 10 years and then made the big change over to insights, thinking, the insights people, they do the bits around marketing that I probably love the most, which is, really digging deep into the consumer mind and trying to figure out what's missing in their lives and helping the brand marketers create that opportunity. So I've really loved that change. And, very recently in November of 2020, I was asked to basically head on over to the US and help the business create a foresight team. So global foresight is essentially a new part of our insights business. So what we call our human intelligence business. So really helping us to understand the consumer of today and the consumer of tomorrow and the future. So as part of that role, I do a lot of fun stuff, including looking 5 and 10 years out into the future, helping the business to see the things more deeply, I would say, inside of our category and what it means. How does it ladder up to, trends and the big macro forces of change in our world, but also really importantly, helping our business to look outside of that, what's happening in adjacencies, what are our competitors doing, potentially in a competitive set that we don't normally assess, and just helping the business to, make the right investments into the further out future.
That's an easy job, right?
Yeah.
Predicting the future and making big strategic decisions based on those expectations. That sounds super easy. Amazing. I always love hearing how insights professionals got into the space, because it's almost never a straight line. And so it's always people who studied psychology or, someone who's in marketing for 10 years. And it just goes to show how these different skill sets all are so crucial to the insights function. It's the
Mm-hmm.
cross-functional collaborative function that, having that outside influence or experience can be really beneficial to an insights professional. So really interesting to hear how you made that switch from marketing into insights. Like, were you working really closely with the insights functions at General Mills, at Essity, prior to making that leap?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, sometimes I would like weasel my way in there and collaborate on a project. Like I remember doing a UNA in General Mills, and the insights teams were like, "You're not allowed to do that. Go back into marketing." I just loved being able to like really get into the data and like even going through the verbatims and just getting really, really close to the consumer. And I think it's such an interesting point that you make, because I was talking literally to someone just yesterday about this, that actually when you have people that move into insights or that move around in different functions, like we know a lot of marketers that go to sales for a little bit and they might come back or they might try something else. I think that just makes you such a more challenged, I would say, employee in the company. So you're challenged in your preconceptions, your ways of working, what you're used to. You're really challenged to think about the things that your co-workers and your colleagues and your business partners face, really understanding how they do it. So I think, coming into Insights, it's been a really great experience for me to think about some of the challenges that my insights teams faced when they were trying to help me create brand and marketing campaigns. It gives me an added level, I guess, of respect and understanding. And I think because of that, now when I work with my marketing teams and my brand teams, I feel like I can get on the same page with them a lot easier and, be their partner in crime and be an advocate for what they do. That's not to say that you can't do that if you're just, straight out of grad school into marketing. But I do think that just stretching yourself into new areas is always a good thing.
Yeah, and having that perspective, understanding what your internal clients' challenges are from
Yeah.
From experience, not just from an empathy perspective. It just adds another layer of understanding there, which is really key.
I agree.
And so Foresight is a fairly new concept, a new role in a lot of companies. I know a couple of people, Sherry, who from Colgate, who we've talked to before here, and because it's so kind of like emerging and something I'm seeing kind of pop up over the last year or two, how would you define Foresight as a function?
I think that Foresight as a function is different depending on which company you go to, depending on what industry you're working in. It's actually incredibly interesting because we've gone through this journey inside of Mars Wrigley. When we created the Foresight team, I remember coming into the role thinking, okay, this is like done and dusted. It's going to be about predicting the future, or it's going to be about trends, or there's going to be some sort of like a manual or a guidebook that I can use to help create foresight in our business. And actually that doesn't exist. So even looking at foresight as an academic practice and, people who study futurism, that's very different to what we do. People who do trend forecasting and agencies like WGSN and Stylist, that's very different to Foresight. Strategy, probably, I would say strategic functions in a business are probably the most similar to what Foresight do day in, day out. But I think that the big learning for me coming into it is that, it's really up to you to create a tailored offer of Foresight for your business. There's no drop and run model for Foresight, and you need to really think about what your business is ready for, is what I often say, what it's actually ready for. So even like, is your business clear on what a macro trend is versus a signal versus, like what a scenario plan can deliver? What point is it in that journey, and what is it ready for? And then, what is it most struggling with? Like, what are the things from a business preparation perspective that your company is really like challenged in getting its head around or getting traction on? And if you can use those two things to help create a Foresight function that's really tailored around that, so the relevance and the readiness, then Foresight can be like your best strategic partner in the business. So I'd say, probably to answer your question more directly, the Foresight team inside of a business is really there to be provide you a strategy, help you to guide investment choices into the further out future, and also to help you to understand the consumer of the future. So understand the patterns of change and what's happening in the world at a more deeper level that's connected into those sort of cultural, societal, behavioral human aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I have a little notification saying I'm muted, but I'm not. So there we go. So you mentioned a few things in there about, how to think about how to build the Foresight team. Like, how do you know if your business understands what is a macro trend? What is a signal? Can you define that for our audience?
Sure. So I think you would probably start at the really, really high level, which is the macro forces of change. So if you think about like a steep model or a steeple model, so societal, political, economic, technological, you look at those very high level macro forces, and those are the things that usually last for decades. So 20 years, 40 years, sometimes longer. They're those very external influencing factors. Then they filter down into what some people call the mega trends. So the trend platforms or territories that last for, maybe a decade. And then they feed into the macro trends, which is trend platforms that essentially last for probably around 3 to 5 years. And then from there, you go one level deeper into the micro trends, which is almost like if you break down a trend into the various attributes that fall within it. Which is actually a really worthwhile thing to do, because sometimes when you talk about a trend, you say health and wellness, for example, like that is so big and broad. When you can break it down into the micro trends or into the sort of the attributes within it, it just helps you to articulate exactly what it is about that trend that you're trying to dig into. Like, is it emotional wellness? Is it mental health? Is it physical nutrition? So then within that, so underneath that, you have essentially the signals of change. And these are the things that we're seeing inside of the world day in, day out that help you to give almost like an example, a tangible example of what that is. So what we often say, and this is probably the most pivotal part, like if you're going to take anything away from like, what the heck is she talking about? This is the most important part, is that you have weak signals and strong signals. So your strong signals are the ones that are quite mainstream. They've been around for a really long time. They're probably the things that are already scaled inside of your category or inside of another category. The weak signals are those ones that, we often talk about with early adopters and the things on the fringe and the things on the outer edges of mainstream that are starting to come in. And if you pay attention to the weak signals, is what we often say is they are the indicators of change. So what's really important is we obviously we look at them, we observe them, but we also try to understand them. So we do a lot of pattern mapping in Foresight, so connecting different things together. We do a lot of what we call change drivers. We create change drivers. So you'll have patterns and then you'll group the patterns and it'll tell you what a change is likely to be. And then you try to connect all of that in with your micro trends, macro forces. And then ultimately, like once you get past that stage, which may or may not sound complicated, depending on, how simple I've made that, you then move into the more sophisticated Foresight work, which is all about prioritization and the cone of uncertainty and scenario planning and some of those things that can help your business to make, really strategic investment choices.
I love how you just described something like very sophisticated, and then you said, and then you move into the sophisticated part of Foresight. But this is all, very new to me, certainly to understand the kind of day-to-day focus of what you're looking at. How much of this is looking at historical patterns in history and life to use to predict the future, and how much of it is using, what's happening in the now?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. So what we often say is when we're looking at the macro forces at that higher level, we really take a lot of history into it. And a lot of Foresight people say that they're closet historians because so much of understanding the world is about understanding how we got here. And so we definitely look at pivotal points in time, particularly across different parts of the world. So we do this a lot where we contextualize, what is the economic growth of a market based on, like, for example, we were having a conversation about China the other week and around, the 70s and how they saw this massive boom in economic growth. And, they brought hundreds of millions of people out of poverty during that time. And now they've gotten to a point where actually their population is declining, they've got a really growing older population, they're trying to rebalance that, and they have a growing wealth gap. So understanding where it is today and then going back and saying, actually, how did they get here, and what are those influencing factors are incredibly, incredibly important. That being said, what we often say is that the past is not a predictor of the future. So it's a really great and important tool for you to be able to understand the context, particularly of not only those hard metrics like demographics and population and wealth, but also big cultural shifts. For example, everything that we're going through in the US at the moment, we say is like history repeating itself, and like the cycle of change around, seeking for justice and righting the wrongs of the past. There's a lot of similarities between what we've gone through in the 60s. So understanding from a cultural perspective, where we are today from where we came from is really important. And then, one of the favorite things that I've had someone say to me is, what we learn from history more than anything is what we don't take away from history. So the lessons that we should be learning, but we're repeating the same mistakes. And that in itself is just a really fascinating thing to look into as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting. I think it's really interesting how, it is important to kind of understand the trends and how we got here, but that's not always an indicator of the foresight of what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years. That, looking at what's the same and what we can learn from the past, but also what's different to be able to predict the future. Gosh, so, that's a lot on your plate. And I know these days that is like the biggest question, right? I'm sure you have people banging down your door all the time looking to understand what's going to happen. What are people going to do? How are behaviors going to change? I guess that's another thing I'm curious about is like, how do you, I guess, is the approach to foresight different under stable circumstances versus unpredictable? Like, I feel like we're just in a very unpredictable time right now. So is the approach to foresight different now than it would be if we were maybe in a more stable time? Or is that like a dream that we even have stable times? Do we ever have stable times? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, when we talk about foresight, we often say it's not about predicting the future, but preparing for future changes. And so with that in mind, you're always analyzing the state of flux, and you're always thinking about, so for example, the wild cards out of the pandemic, like what if another wave comes around, or what if a market, completely rejects the vaccines? Like, you're constantly thinking about those wild cards and the blind spots and those things that are sort of around the corner. And I think that you apply that same level of thinking and stringency to any point in time and any point in history. I think that at the moment things feel more uncertain than ever before because, the pandemic is a wild card. So some people were asking at the start of the pandemic, is this a black swan? Is this like a event that we just could not have foreseen? And absolutely, we did foresee it. There are so many, great reports and analyses that actually show that, and ideally there were some foresight practitioners in that mix, that actually all of the signs of a pandemic and our systems, more than anything else, our systems were completely unprepared to handle that. And probably maybe the surprising element and the wild card was actually the lack of collaboration that we saw, and the sort of the rejection for the common good, maybe, and the distrust. But even that, you could say, we saw patterns of distrust and a desire for transparency and a pushback on government and all of those things. So I would say probably it feels very uncertain at the moment. And certainly that's why foresight is in such high demand. I think that, one of my favorite parts about foresight is actually connecting in with other people in companies who are creating a foresight team. And there are so many at the moment. I was talking to someone just this morning who's helping to establish a foresight team. And I think that's really great, is to be able to share, not only the methodologies that we use and the partners that we create, but as someone said to me this morning, how do you create a culture of foresight inside of your business? How do you get people to really adapt their thinking and to really think more critically, or to think about the uncomfortable things that their business is facing? And I think it's really great. There's some positive signs around companies creating foresight functions, but even I think in the external environment now, we're starting to see so much recognition for the foresight practice. My favorite was the World Economic Forum just posted this week um, around the need to use foresight when we're talking about climate change and environmental changes in the world, which again you might say it feels really uncontrollable and unpredictable, and we're in this really strange time of change with the climate and companies needing to adapt to that. But again, it's an example of where we can use foresight tools and methodologies and practices to help to navigate through to some of the things that are potentials or are likely to happen, and more importantly, some of the change that we can create plausibly within your own company to help to be prepared for what's to come.
Mhm. That's really interesting. And I guess how can that help, that sort of creating that culture of foresight, help with solve for that lack of collaboration potentially?
I think that the great thing about foresight is that it's almost sometimes like the lifeblood between different parts of the business when it's working effectively. So I think the worst thing that you can do is create a foresight team that just goes off and sits in a corner and is like, some data analysis, data crunching teams, or some strategic teams that feel like they work really independently of your business. I think the best thing that you can do is to create an avenue where foresight can come in and collaborate with the different parts of the business, whether it's your brand team or whether it's your senior leadership team. So find the right forums for foresight to come in, and also just allow foresight to be a little bit disruptive. So throughout October, we did this really fun thing where we held provocation sessions. We had five futurists come in and help to provoke about the future. They all did different topics. So we had like Faith Popcorn come in and talk about radical futures. We had Jake Soteritis come in, who's from the National Intelligence University, came in about talking about wargaming. So we had like these really provocative sessions. And the great thing about that is that afterwards, we had so many people coming to us saying, "Oh, I want to learn more about this. Can I partner with you on this project that I'm thinking about doing?" So I think the more that you can feed it into existing processes, but also give foresight the breadth to be able to come in and be like a little troublemaker, like a positive troublemaker, to help to disrupt our thinking and our standard, comfortable business way of working, it can create some really great impact.
I love that. I love that you guys get to be little positive troublemakers. I'm like so curious to understand how you then make the link between like what you're learning from somebody about war games to snacks and consumer goods and things like that. Like what are you learning from? I mean, it sounds exciting. Like you're learning from all different like very diverse schools of thought to then make decisions about how you're going to serve your consumer community.
Yeah, and it's probably the biggest challenge that we face is, that not everyone in a business can create those links, in their own minds around how these things matter to a Snickers brand manager or my Snickers brand plan. And I think that's really, really fair. So I think a big onus that we put on ourselves is to help connect the dots for the business. So a lot of the times we come in with those bigger, higher level provocations, and then we say, okay, so here's 3 things that we think you should do about this. So for example, we did this big piece of work at the start of 2021 to basically say to the business, hey, the pandemic's going to be around for a lot longer than what we think. It's actually probably going to come into recovery in 2024. Sorry to break everyone's hearts.
Oh my gosh.
But we're going to start to see some signs of recovery throughout that process. And actually, one of the big things is that we're seeing is adaptability. And so we talked about, that businesses are completely rethinking their business models. They're thinking about how to reach consumers in new ways. They're thinking about how they can stretch their footprint, how they can partner more, how they can give back some of their platform to, for example, an online seller, helping to give some of their reach for a local farmer. So really sort of adapting their business models, or even like inside of our homes, adapting our homes to be more work friendly. So these big shifts, and that was very high level and quite challenging. It might not sound challenging, but challenging for people to get their heads around, to go like, what do I do with this? And so then we kind of brought it one level down and said, well, for example, if you're thinking about how people are shopping, some of the innovation that we're seeing out of this adaptability shift is, automated vending that doesn't mean that you need to touch anything on the screen, or roaming robots that allow you to have something come to you instead of you going to that location. So here's some innovations that bring to life that kind of shift that's coming in people's minds and inside of companies. And therefore, here's 3 things that we think that we should be investing in today, or exploring or piloting today. So I think it's a really big challenge. And I think sometimes what I've heard from people is, Foresight needs to stay inside of that bigger, higher level headspace, and we need to be the strategic thinkers inside of the business, and help to provide that kind of perspective, and help for people to gain that skill to be able to make the connections themselves of what it means, what I should do with it. And actually, I feel like there's something in between. There's a responsibility that we have to bridge that gap, to help them go, okay, this is how it's connected to your brand. Here's one thing that we think that you could do with it. And I think the more that you can connect the dots for them and help to make those links, then over time, they'll start to do that themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting, like how you can kind of, be that translator from a lot of different ideas into like an actual, this is a recommendation, or, a decision that the business can make as a result. It's really interesting. So tell me how in some ways, how is Foresight different from market research strategies that are maybe more traditional, focused on, marketing objectives or innovation objectives?
I think 2 things. One is that we're definitely more focused on big pivots for the business. So if we're looking at the moment, we're looking at 2026 to 2032, then we're really thinking about not just small innovations or pilots. We're thinking about big changes that the company needs to make, or the futures that our company is least prepared for. So that's one thing I would say. And it's not to say that a strategic function, or maybe a sustainability part of your business or your marketing team, doesn't think about that, or doesn't look at that, or helps to create a brand plan that bridges to that. But certainly that's not what they live and breathe every single day. And that's not what they're driving their business leaders to every single day. And that is what we're doing every day. So I'd say, the projects that we're working on at the moment are really like, hey, 2032, we think that this big thing is coming. Here's some steps that we think we need to take to be able to get there. And they're not small. They're really big. They're big investments. They're things that are in very early stages for consumers at the moment. So it's going to require a lot of time and effort. So that's one thing I would say. And then the second thing is, I think maybe, what's really different from traditional insights or market research in particular, is that we don't really do research in the traditional sense. So even though we sit inside of the insights function, and that is the case for most companies that have Foresight, it's inside of Insight, we don't really do research. We do research not by asking consumers what they want, but by observing the world. So I guess Insights observes consumers. We observe the world. So we look at basically a multitude of sources and data, and then we do a lot of observation on that. We do a lot of critical thinking on that, pattern mapping, trying to not come up with a so what, which is, I think, what Insights does. It comes up with a so what and a why. We come up with a what next, really trying to think about different scenarios of different futures that might play out. And then we're probably looking, I hope I'm not offending anyone, I think that we're looking across at more of a multitude of factors than traditional teams do. So I think, we're moving into a world where we're specializing inside of certain areas. And I think Foresight is one of the rare teams that actually day in, day out, I'm looking at politics, and I'm looking at technological changes, and I'm talking about the metaverse, and then I'm switching over and I'm talking about indulgence inside of chocolate, and what our competitors are doing, not just inside of not just what Hershey's is doing, but what B corporations are doing, and what our retailers are doing. So really looking across the entire sort of environment. And a part of the reason that we do that is because we know that the biggest thing that we can help our business with is to help prepare for obsolescence. So we often talk about businesses being really comfortable operating in the models that they're operating in. And Foresight is that one function that can help you to go, actually, all of this could be flipped on its head and could be completely disrupted. And so how do you prepare for that? What are some of the things that you could do to counter that? So it's definitely sort of, very much anchored into insights from the sense that we're really here to help to articulate what the consumer of the future is going to want. And so to do that, we need to really deeply understand human beings from, like you said before, history, today, and then the future, projecting out. But then alongside that, we look at so much of the external environment, what's outside of what we normally look at inside of a business that, if I haven't sold it yet, I mean, it's a really fun job. I highly recommend anyone that's interested in Foresight to get into it. It definitely keeps you on your toes.
It sounds like a lot of fun. I'm considering a career move right now.
Do it. Come
join your team. That would be a lot of fun. Well, and so you, in order to then make that translation happen, right, and get this everything you're learning and that you're predicting, get it out to everybody in the business, you launched this Future Imagined podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started and of that initiative to start with?
Yes, I'd be really happy to. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So thank you for the avenue. So we we created Future Imagined, which is available on any podcast player. We created that in February of 2021. And essentially, it was exactly to solve for the problem that you just spoke about. And probably, for anyone listening to me going, actually, she's way too high level. I don't know what she's talking about. That's exactly the problem that we face in Foresight quite a lot. So we need to not dumb it down, but we need to make it, a lot more easy and natural for people to understand, and to not only understand some of the themes that are happening, some of the signals of change, some of the investment opportunities, but also to feel it. Is what I like to think the podcast does, because we bring in essentially different experts from different fields. We deep dive into a topic per episode, and we just go really deep on it. And I'd like to think that we balance, bringing facts and making people informed about the future with making people really feel, why is this happening? How is this impacting human beings? And make it just a really easy, fun listen. So I started the podcast when I joined the team because I felt like my biggest challenge was going to be to communicate some of these big high level topics into something that people wouldn't just get a 50-page report about and go, yeah, I'll read that another time because it's 2030. I've got 10 years, 10 years to read that one. Or they would read it and just be like, this is really interesting, and then file it. It's my worst nightmare coming into the Foresight team. And I think maybe because I've come from the marketing background, I'm always thinking about actionability and how do you position something in a way that people get really excited about it. So I felt like the podcast format was just a great natural way to do that. I mean, conversations, it's just such a natural thing for people to listen to and to take in. And like I said, to feel. But also I felt like it was a great way to bring the outside in for our business. So we're a very introverted company, like a lot of CPGs are. So we focus very much on our category and our industry. And I really wanted to bring more of the outside in. So external thinkers, futurists, external companies. So we've had Vice on there. We've had PepsiCo. We've had obviously trend agencies and the like. But people who are experts on the topic, but also just really bring that different and fresh perspective on the topic as well. So it's been really successful inside of our company, and we had this request really early on to make it externally available because, not a lot of Foresight podcasts exist, and certainly none from a big CPG company, and certainly not from a private company. So I think it's quite a rare position that we're in, where we're helping to bring thought leadership into the industry, but also that we're hopefully opening the lines of collaboration. Like if I can start more conversations with people about Foresight and around what we're seeing inside of the world, then maybe there's opportunity for us to collaborate on finding solutions to some of the problems that are seemingly unsurmountable.
Yeah. So what was one of the big catalysts for actually moving from taking an internal tool and moving it to something more public? I mean, yes, of course, it's great for thought leadership and things like that. But but what was the sort of trigger point that said this really needs to be a public conversation?
It was really just the companies that were partaking in the podcast asking us if we could. Like, can we share it with our company? We really want to do something similar. Can I share it with my business leaders? And I just kept on getting that every single episode with every single guest. And I thought, why is that? Obviously it's something that's maybe not completely missing from the industry, but certainly something that people are craving more of. And certainly something that, has generated so much positivity. If I think about, the advocates, and I'm talking about like sustainability advocates or health and wellness advocates that have listened to the show and then reached out to me and said, oh my God, like Mars Wrigley is talking about these topics. It's not something that we would normally see spoken about from, a candy company. So even that is starting positive conversations that then lead to potential, pilots, or for like getting some universities reaching out, asking me if I can speak to their students. So I think it's just it's been a really positive catalyst for openness, I would say, an openness for companies to find, solutions to problems in the world. And I don't want to overstate its importance, like it's just a podcast. But certainly I think, if you take anything out of that example of me creating a podcast inside of Mars Wrigley, other than it being, hopefully an interesting listen, it's also, I think, an example of where the insights industry potentially needs a little bit more provocation and just trying different things. And like your podcast, I think, is a great example of that as well. And even like going live on a podcast on LinkedIn, just for us just to be pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones and not be relying on the same ways that we either research or that we talk about the topics of the future. The more of that we get inside of our industry, I think the better off everybody is.
Yeah, totally. Although I will challenge you when you say it's just a podcast. I think it's more than that. It is producing some change in the industry, and people are craving that. And I think that just having this function, as you say, like it is a differentiator, because you're thinking not just about, what product you're going to launch in 18 months from now, but like you said, like what products are you going to launch in 2032? Which I am curious to see what ends up happening. But, I think, anything that you guys can do that's going to differentiate you from you said this earlier about preventing being obsolete, being able to actually predict what's consumer behavior and what consumers care about 5-10 years from now is, if you can nail that, like it's a big advantage.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say that I think what's also maybe like a truth in our industry that we don't talk about is that you're not the only one that's looking at trends. You're not the only one that's thinking about, plastic biodegradability and people moving to plant-based products. Like everybody in our industry is noticing the same thing. So let's have a conversation about it. What does it mean, so that we can all better understand it and not give each other, competitive secrets or a competitive advantage, but just get on the same level playing field and try to, create, a greater opportunities for us all to progress in the right areas.
Yeah, that is one trend I've seen in the industry in the last few years that I love is like more collaboration amongst seemingly competing businesses, right? Like
Yes.
everybody is trying to, understand the same trends and understand the same people potentially, and hopefully serve a community. Yes, we're all trying to hit revenue numbers and grow our businesses, but if we can do some good in the meantime, and do that together, then we'll be more powerful in doing it.
Yeah, agree.
And so when it comes to kind of, creating those consumer experiences, communicating with consumers, this is all like, those are the differentiators, right? Between the different businesses, creating those experiences. How do you see consumer communication, consumer experience evolving in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so I think definitely what's been spoken about quite a lot is that we're moving towards greater personalization or a greater curation of content, or content. I would even say, like, maybe into the future, it's products that are curated just for you and your needs, or maybe even what mood you're in that specific moment. So I think that, we've been talking about personalization for a really long time. And then particularly when we're talking about comms and media, now it's kind of hit a wall because we're talking about privacy and, what is that line in between? But I think that, the big thing that we're talking about and we're noticing is actually it's things that are personal, not personalized. So it's not personalization for the sake of novelty. It's personal to, like, people trying to really figure out what mood and what counter mood they are in, or more intuitive experiences, things that really react and respond to diverse needs and perspectives. So I think a great example of that is, you see uh, obviously like the content creator boom, I think, or even crowdfunded, crowdsourced products. So it's an ability for an individual to reach another individual, and for me that's personalization essentially. Like you're not having different packaging with different branding on it. You're almost having like a one-to-one conversation, and I'd like to hope that in the future that one-to-one conversation between a creator and a user can be a brand and a user. So I think definitely we're primed for more personal, more intuitive um, communication. And I would probably say also, we've been moving towards frictionless experiences, and we've been talking about this for a while. It's like stores are moving to frictionless shopping and biometrics, so I don't even have to take out my wallet. I can just go in and out of the store, and obviously that's not scaled and it's not everywhere, but that's what we're having conversations about, even the online shopping experience, for that to be frictionless. And actually what we're seeing is almost like a counter to that is meaningful friction, is what we're calling it. So how do you create a little point of disruption so that, people can discover something new or can have like a positive surprise moment? Like I feel like particularly when we're talking about online shopping or even online communication, that's really missing. It's just such a dry, predictable experience, that I think it can definitely benefit from a little bit of meaningful friction. And hopefully if you can then couple that with something that's personal and meaningful and intuitive, um, imagine a world where we could have that, and we can stop bagging out advertising and brands for being boring and disruptive. They can actually bring some friction that you're welcoming into your life.
I love that term of meaningful friction. It's like, I think I've had a lot of conversations with people about the shopping experience. In store, you've got that little temptation aisle, right? Right by when you're checking out, where you can discover something new or get excited about a new product. And, my favorite is the little temptation aisle at Ulta, right? They have a little like, travel size products that you can try and discover something new. But that is kind of an experience that's missing from an online experience, or a digital experience. I guess I've started to see some examples of that when you are ordering groceries online, and right before checkout, It might
Mm,
say, hey, you might have forgotten something, or, other people have purchased this, but that meaningful friction, I love the idea of that. I can imagine it's probably something that'll be tricky to nail the right balance, right? Where it is meaningful and it's not,
mm,
it's not
annoying.
right, exactly. That you're like a pop-up, right? Like it's actually
Mm.
providing value.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it's an interesting example that you give as well, because we often think about like taking examples from grocery products, but actually, like if you go into a beauty store or go into like a Nike store and have a look at how they're disrupting and how they're surprising and how they're creating more personal moments inside of the store. There's so much of that we can, steal with pride if we then move it into the food category. So
Sure.
I think that's a nice link in also to foresight. And every time we give an example of a change that's coming or something interesting that's happening, it's usually a combination of in category and outside of category. So we can take inspiration from what's happening from around different parts of this, the store or the world, because we know these consumers are not in like separate. Like who's buying your chocolate is not separate to who's buying beauty products. It's the same consumer.
Mhm.
So they're comparing these experiences and they're thinking about where one is annoying and one is boring and one is not. So there's a lot to be inspired by.
I love that. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
It was so much fun. It's always fun to talk to you, and hopefully we will do it again soon. Yeah, thank you. I think I've learned a ton, and I'm sure the audience has as well about Foresight. So I'll probably go away and then come up with a bunch of new questions for you, and we'll have to get together again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for listening. Please remember to rate and review the show, and we will see you again soon.